welcome to the Doom Scroll News Report here on Radio Taiwan International, where I, Amanda Stevens, and my co-host,
Hanna Belinsky,
two writers, political by necessity, cover some of the biggest international news stories dominating our news feeds from the last week. I'm Amanda Stevens, and this week we're tackling the Cloudflare outage and what, if anything, it means, a New York Times editorial that blamed women for ruining the workplace, and finally, what it says about 2025 that Cambridge's word of the year is parasocial. I've been doing this recently because I feel like I need to pick me up after the news.
No, it's fun this way, actually.
I like it. I am an English nerd, though, so I really like reading into whatever dictionaries choose as the word of the year. Is that the sort of thing that you keep up with, Hanna?
Oh, of course I do.
This is when words. The fact that we say we're writers really
actually
shows.
Fun fact, many years ago, I used to run a Tumblr blog that was just dedicated to rare and unusual words that I liked. And that was probably my very first taste of anything that could be considered internet success, because I think I hit like 1,000 followers at the height of it.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, that was like a
the
little
Dictionary
pet
of
project.
Obscure Sorrows or
kind
whatever it was.
Kind of.
That's a YouTube page that does something similar to that.
That being said, I have lost a lot of my perspicacity. There's a $5 review due to pregnancy and postpartum, and this past year has probably been the stupidest I've ever felt in my life. But I am slowly getting my brain back. Slowly.
It's fun. Yeah, there's a lot of truth when they say like pregnancy brain, like the hormones will just erase.
Unfortunately,
any
it's real.
sense of self.
I felt
that you
it.
Had. Yeah. So anyway, speaking of services being erased, I suppose
my brain service being
your
erased,
brain service being interrupted. So we discussed this last time, but much in the same way that the last one kind of came to my attention because of a personal outage. Mm-hmm. This one also affected me in a similar way. We're going to start with, I almost said the AWS outage, but it's not. It was a Cloudflare outage, which was yet now another service that I've seen the name of, and I had to learn what it was.
Same.
So on Tuesday, I noticed while I was out and about that my Spotify didn't work, saying that I was offline when I wasn't, which does seem small, to be fair. And it did only last a few hours. But since we talked about the AWS crash or the Amazon Web Services crash recently, it did catch my attention, and it turns out that it was, in fact, another large internet service provider crash last week. Amazon this time is in the clear, though, because, as I said, it was Cloudflare, which is a service that manages about 20% of online traffic that crashed because of a bug, an IT bug. Cloudflare was originally created to stop and search out spam emails. But now it is a cloud and cybersecurity provider that manages internet traffic and blocks malicious attacks for around 20% of all internet services and 35% of Fortune 500 companies, for whatever that means to you. Thank you to the Observer for that reporting that taught me about that. All this to say, while it's not the same as the Amazon Web Services crash, it did have a similar effect and reach. If we go with 20%, then that's 1/5 of internet traffic. And when we say internet, what we really mean is online, because those don't seem or appear to be the same, right? So thankfully, this one was shorter in scope and kind of duration. It did only last a few hours. But Hanna, did this blackout affect you in any way?
I was tickled a little bit reading the sites and apps that were affected by this blackout, because I don't think I use any of them. The one that stuck out to me was Grindr, and I was like, oh no, my gay hookup app that I don't use.
Yeah.
I actually recognize this Cloudflare, this name. I remember, like, it has.
You see it on like the bottom of a lot a lot of websites.
Yes.
It's also on like a loading page for a lot of websites.
Exactly, but I've never actually looked into what it was until, of course, it failed.
Until it crashed.
Yeah, and it just raises the same question that we have been going over. Why are these few services holding together most of the internet?
Well, I'm so glad that you said that, because this time I wanted to talk about whether or not these blackouts are actually happening more frequently? Or even to investigate, is it just an attention bias thing? Meaning that like because we're seeing the problem or because we're looking for the problem more now, we're seeing it everywhere. Thank you, Lisa Edicio at CNN, for thinking the same thing as me, writing the article, Why Does It Feel Like Your Favorite Websites Keep Going Down? In it, she says that it is a combination of society's increased reliance on digital services, the consolidation of critical cloud infrastructure between just a few companies, and the proclivity of people to complain about tech mishaps online.
Yeah. Yep.
So it is both. It is, or not both,
All
actually.
of the above.
A little bit of all of the above, but part of it is that we are paying attention to it and complaining about it, and so we are not an echo chamber, but not
just feeding
not
into
an echo
it.
chamber, right?
Right.
Interestingly, though, the article pointed out that these outages aren't increasing like in number. Okay. But one reason why we might be seeing more of them is because the number of services affected by these large services is greater. So actually, when you look at the number of large internet outages that we've had this year, it is on par with previous years. And actually, 2025's, I think, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, was a little bit lower than 2024's. Okay. So some of them are up and some of them are down, right? Now, to give an idea of what I mean when I say the number of affected websites is larger, let's talk about Cloudflare. According to that CNN article, the Cloudflare system that went down manages about 81 million HTTP requests per second.
Phew.
HTTP requests are things like a request to load a web page, for example. So you can see how even a routine bug or problem that may be fixed within a few hours could cause mass problems very quickly. Now, it goes on to say that these kind of tech problems are constant, and it's just kind of part of the problem of being reliant on online systems, that nobody is immune to this kind of thing. There's no way to stop them from happening. But what measures do you think could be adopted on a personal level or a larger governmental level to help deal with these outages?
As far as the government is concerned, I think transparency should be a key word here, because it feels like only because these outages have occurred and only because they were so large have we realized how much of the internet is basically teetering upon these couple of things. I think we should have known more somehow, you know, especially
like this information should be more public.
Yes, especially because we are so online now, and not just in our personal lives, but like we do all of our work online, or a lot of people do now.
Well, for example, I got a new computer today, and the bright side was that I didn't need to back anything up because it was already backed up on an online cloud.
Right.
The downside is if that cloud goes down, there goes all of my work. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I also think the more that I look at these outages and how much it affects even like me personally, to be honest, something that I thought about was perhaps the over-reliance is also a big issue. Yeah, and especially piggybacking off of what we talked about last week with the idea that, like, for example, AI is now being forced into many different things. We've sort of adapted to a lifestyle where the internet has been integrated into so many things where we don't need it. And perhaps a little more, the movement in the United States is called the Luddite movement, but perhaps a little bit more of that would help, meaning just kind of decoupling ourselves from technology.
Yeah. You mentioned Spotify. You know, we didn't used to rely on Spotify to listen to music. We would just have MP3 players where we downloaded all of our music.
We had a music player.
Yeah, and that
you
was
can still
ours.
download music.
Yes, you can.
You can still, and it actually supports artists more.
Yes.
You can download podcasts and keep them and then get rid of them when you're done listening to them.
Yeah, but so I stopped using Spotify. I kind of reverted to just buying and downloading music.
Oh, I mean, one day I'm gonna get Spotify on this podcast because I am upset with the people who own it.
I got a problem with them too.
But yeah, that was sort of my takeaway, that perhaps maybe another solve for this would be just to disconnect. All right, something that blew up my news feed, although it's not quite as recent as the web service outages, was that about 2 weeks ago, the New York Times published an opinion column. Notable, it's in the opinion column, which originally was titled, "Did Women Ruin the Workplace? And Can Conservatist Feminism Fix It?" and was very quickly amended to "Did liberal feminism ruin the workplace?" which is what it is now titled as. And then the next day after that, they published another piece called "Have Feminine Vices Taken Over the Workplace?" which does seem to me to be an excerpt from this larger opinion piece. Mm-hmm. So before we get into it, we're going to be sort of discussing what they talk about there. Not really, but if you are interested in checking this out, I would put one warning there.
It's long.
Yeah, that's the warning. I went in to go read this, not realizing that the opinion article is actually a transcript of a 1 hour long debate between two conservative writers. So a quick overview of what the discussion was. This is the host of the New York Times opinion column, hosted this debate between two conservative writers, one, Helen Andrews, and number two, Leah Libresco-Sargent. Helen was a woman who wrote an essay entitled "The Great Feminization" that the host described as an essay that argues that feminism has failed us because it's made our institutions too feminized and has driven men and masculine virtues out. Versus Sargent, who wrote a book called "The Dignity of Dependence," which suggests that it's liberal feminism that has failed us by forcing women to suppress their nature and fit into workplaces and social systems made for men. Now, for the article itself, I do think that the host does an okay job of pressing these women on their beliefs and kind of holding their toes to the fire when they're contradictory. I would also say that I did appreciate how, while I don't really agree with either one, Sargent did a better job of holding Andrews accountable for what felt like a lot more glossing over of very key details to make her point sound better.
I agree.
Such as omitting things like, oh, it was just a light scandal, when in fact it was a sexual harassment allegation.
Right.
So there were some things that were good. I would also say the reason I included what their original point or what they published is because I think they did a good job of arguing towards what they believed. I just don't agree with them.
Yeah. Yep.
Although I do agree more with Sargent, who I think comes very close to making some good points.
Almost.
A lot of their points kind of focus on how the feminization of the workplace is bad because it means that we are losing masculine values. And in this, feminization was a stand-in for what felt like gossiping, which is literally what Andrews argues when she's asked. She said feminization is gossiping and not facing things head on.
Yeah, yep.
Sargent's point with her dependence, D-E-P-E-N-D-E-N-C-E, dependence, was a lot more about how, as society, we should be more accepting of dependence because our society is, by nature, filled with many people who are dependent upon others, whether that's children, whether that's pregnant women, or even elderly parents upon people who don't have children.
Yeah,
so again,
people with disabilities. Yeah.
Right. I felt a lot closer to her point. But I'm not actually really here to talk about that discussion. What I really wanted to talk to you about,
it's very
Hannah,
long.
Why publish this in the first place? And I'm going to try and boil it down because you and I could say a lot. We could have done the entire podcast about this.
Could have been the whole show. Easily.
Could have been 2 shows, I feel like.
Yeah.
But this was originally published as "Did Women Ruin the Workplace?" which I think is their main point.
Deliberately.
And was then sanitized because, of course, it made people angry. Because that's the kind of headline that is supposed to make people angry.
Right.
It's like, is kicking puppies actually good for your toes? Nobody's going to read that and be like, oh, well, that must be great. Now, Vanity Fair, I think, has a pretty good response to this. What I wanted to talk about is there any value to publishing, and I guess in what we're doing now as well, engaging with and discussing pieces like this? Or is engaging with this and even publishing it really just boil down to sort of like engaging with trolling or rage baiting or whatever you want to call it on kind of like a nationwide level?
So I almost would not recommend people to read this whole exchange because it is so convoluted, and I think
a lot of the arguments do not make sense.
Yes, and conversations like this are destined to become nonsensical because when someone tries to collapse human behavior into male and female categories, then it's going to go into nonsense mode. Gendered behavior is is made up. By gendered metrics, I have more male traits than I do female traits. It means nothing. Plus, it's laughable, really, to try and prop up this idea of feminine vices or toxic femininity. If women's greatest crime is
existing in the workplace or
gossiping and passive aggression, oh no, what are we going to do? Just deal with it. It's not even a big deal. I don't like it, to be sure, but it's easier to deal with than being, I don't know, beaten.
The thing is, Andrews is very upset about the fact that we have the phrase toxic masculinity, but we do not have the phrase toxic femininity.
Why be upset?
And now I would say, I don't think there's anything wrong in asking why we don't usually have the phrase toxic femininity, but we do have ideas as like toxic positivity, right? That's when the insistence on one trait or the valuing of one trait or set of traits is prioritized over what might be best for the larger group. So the reason that we don't have this idea of a toxic femininity in most workplaces is because most societies around the world, and especially most white societies, which I say because this is coming from New York, do not prioritize femininity as something that must be in place. And I think the only place where that conversation might hold a candle would be if we get into childcare, but that's not where this goes. This isn't about that, right?
It's not about that. Now, I will say liberal feminism, wokeness, cancel culture, these things are also worthy of critique by themselves. But I don't think they are the reason the workplace sucks. This exchange, it's bait. They are trying to trigger people when really the problem is capitalism. But I think this is deflecting from the real reason that company culture is toxic. It was already toxic before any liberal feminism or wokeness. Including wokeness, it just gives companies another weapon, another excuse to oust someone who is really just more trouble than they're worth for the company's bottom line. It doesn't really have anything to do with feminism. It's just that the problem is the workplace sucks.
And that was something the Vanity Fair article brought up. One of the contributors pointed out that something that comes up a lot in that article, and then we'll close it shortly after this. Very quickly into that article, we are introduced to the idea that Andrews believes in just a gender essentialist way of thinking. And it also becomes clear that the real thing that she has a problem with is wokeness and kind of funneling everything she doesn't like into this idea of wokeness. But the Vanity Fair response is that toxic workplaces don't become toxic just because one gender is present. Or just because somebody complains. That's not what makes it bad. It just means that it was already bad before women or complainers got there.
And then it's absorbing more bad things to make the workplace even worse.
Right. So if you saw that on your feed, the warning would be that it is 1 hour long. But then 2, I would say before you really get into it, consider whether or not you think it is actually worth indulging in or engaging in. There are avenues where these kind of discussions can be productive. If you're talking to somebody who, like on a one-on-one thing, where they're honestly seeking to change their mind or they have questions, that's a good moment to engage.
They're just stirring the pot.
However, if you're just going to go into the internet comment section or like us, rant about it online, it may not necessarily be worth your time. I wanted to talk about Cambridge's Word of the Year. Cambridge, Oxford, and even dictionary.com all put out their own Word of the Year to sort of either represent words that were meteorically popular, words that came out of nowhere, or really describe social movements or anything else from that year. It's not the only language to do this, but it can be a fun way to reflect on what happened in the last year, which is exactly what we're going to be doing. So, Cambridge's Word of the Year was parasocial, which means involving or relating to a connection that someone feels between themselves and a famous person they do not know, which is sort of just like that feeling of if you have a celebrity, a YouTuber, a podcast host, even a president perhaps, who you feel like you're friends, but you don't actually know them in person. You don't know them on the level you feel that you do, which is quite common and isn't, in my opinion, inherently bad. The one thing that did catch my attention, though, was that when I was looking at the headlines about this, both of these are centrist kind of news columns, by the way. One of them, painted it in a pretty neutral way. Parasocial, that one-sided feeling you really know a celebrity, is Cambridge Dictionary's word of the year from Sky News. And on EuroNews, Cambridge Dictionary's 2025 word of the year, parasocial, an unhealthy modern phenomenon. Which, to me, sort of felt like it couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
And
tell us how you really feel.
How do you really feel? Now, another thing that I thought was interesting was that first definition from Sky News went on to describe that this could also be used to represent people's relationships or growing relationships with AI chatbots, which is something that we have and will continue to discuss as it continues to be relevant. Now, one, do you think that this is a good word for the year? But then two, do you have any parasocial relationships yourself? And who is your parasocial boo, if so?
I was ahead of the curve on this word because I was terminally online for a period of time.
That's why we have the show.
I first became aware of this word parasocial during the COVID pandemic when a lot of people retreated online. And it was also the height of the podcast era. And people were using it in the context with reference to the hosts, that their listeners were parasocially under the impression that somehow these hosts are kind of their besties. I really think it all started with the pandemic. I know that the word is the word of the year now because everyone is using AI chatbots, but I think it was this pandemic era that initially fried everyone's socialization to a crisp. And also all of these influencers and YouTubers. And that feeds into my parasocial relationship with my favorite YouTuber, which is just some Australian guy who is somehow the funniest dude ever. I just really like his videos. That's really all it boils down to.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the closest I've come to a parasocial relationship because I actually I care about this guy for some reason.
Yes. I think it's a very good word of the year, but not only just for chatbots, because this year I feel like I've seen a lot of politicians become the focus of parasocial relationships.
You know, I think it's also born out of influencer culture and micro celebrities where people consume so much content from one person, like me with my YouTuber, that they then apply this same sort of relating to someone on a one-sided basis to other celebrities, larger celebrities, political figures, things of that nature.
Well, and I think, I don't know if I brought this up with chatbots, I think there's a positive way to read into this, which is that humans are really good and amazing at forming bonds with other people.
Yes.
And also that there is a need and a strong want that we have to belong with other people. And and I think that's a good thing. I think that, that's what helps. That's how we build strong friendships. I think you can use parasocial lightly as a joke. For me, I have a parasocial relationship with a horror podcast hosted by Hallie Kiefer and Allison Leiby. Thank you, ladies. But it is worth remembering that at the end of the day, you don't know them. Yeah. And it's fine to care about somebody. And I don't hate that this is the word of the year. I don't also think it's as bad as the unhealthy word of the year for this unhealthy thing. I think it's somewhere in the middle.
I think if you can approach it in a level-headed way, it's totally fine to be kind of obsessed with somebody.
For our final out, I would say that Cambridge doesn't just pick one word. They had other top words of the year, which did include delulu. Delulu.
Not skibbity.
I love delulu. Number 2 is skibbity.
No.
Number 3, you'll hate even more, was tradwife.
Oh, God.
But they also noted that the word slop, meaning AI slop,
that's a good addition.
Had a huge impact this year. And finally, memify. So that's going to be it for our news report today. Kind of meditate on which one of those you think best sums up 2025. And who's your parasocial relationship? Do you really know them? Not to call that into question, but, just maybe reconsider it. Anyway, a quick reminder that you can find all of our referenced articles in the show notes for today's episode. I'm Amanda Stevens.
I'm Hanna Malinsky.
And thanks for joining us on air today. Tune in tomorrow for more programs by Radio Taiwan International. And in the meantime, remember to stop scrolling and touch grass. We'll see you next week.